it's Janet with Sugar Shine Designs, and today I'm going to show you how to make this cute camper card that includes these fresh air stamps and the inside which say life is what you make it, roam free. The card is made with this cute CottageCutz camper, and it's called Teardrop Trailer. There's a lot of intricate little pieces in this, and I'll show you how to make it later on. Once I stamp the fresh air and the heart circle, I use the stitched circle dies. And in this case, I used the two smallest one to cut them out after I had stamped them, and they fit really nicely on the front of this card. Now the inside, I also used a CottageCutz die, and this is the double stitched rectangle. It's the second largest, and it fit really nicely inside of that. So now that I've shown you all the dies, let's get started. Alright, so here you've seen that I cut out all the pieces of the die cut and began putting them together. Now you'll notice the bottom of the trailer has some embossing, and I just used a border embosser for that. I thought it added some neat little interest, made it more funky and fun. Now each of these little pieces go together very easily, even that tiny little tail light, which is so darn cute and really adds, I think, the crowning glory to this die cut. But the point of it is that even though the parts are small, this is really pretty easy to put together. All you need is a little bit of glue and your tweezers, and you can get this together really very quickly. Now another thing that I did is I used various color distress dyes to ink up these little pieces. It just gives it a little bit more dimension and fun. This die is really so much fun to work with, but I have to say the most favorite part for me is this little awning. It just makes the whole thing pop and makes it so darn cute. Alright, so next I'm going to do the inside of the card just so that I can get that done before I create the front. It's harder to work with the inside if you have the outside all done, so generally I do the inside next. And what I did is I just took two stamps that were flowers. This first one I used twice, one on each side, and then a bigger one that goes with this set was in the middle, and I used a different color for that too, so that it just had some layering going on and some interest with that. Now, while we're watching this, I do want to tell you, I didn't talk much about the base of the card so far, and the base of the card is made using an envelope punch. It's using a pattern similar to what I saw several other people do on YouTube that shows you how to make a mason jar with a envelope punch. And I did this with the card, and what I did was folded a piece of paper in half and cut it with the envelope maker so that it would create a card base. And you can see how to make these shaped mason jars on YouTube. I'll put a link to one of them. But what I am going to show you is how I created the front of the card using that envelope punch, so you kind of get the idea of how I did it. And here I am putting the last finishing touches here on the life is what you make it stamp. And once that was done, then I added one last little bit which says perfect. So life is what you make it perfect. I thought that was a nice little touch to the card. And then of course at the bottom of the card, if you remember in the very beginning, I added one more phrase that'll show in a bit that says roam free. And I don't know, I'm a camper, my family's camped, we've camped since I was a little girl, and really enjoy the whole outdoors, and I liked the feeling that this card gave me of being able to capture in a jar, if you will, the feeling and fun of being outdoors and camping and enjoying life, really. And here's the finished piece. Switching gears, I'm going to show you how to make the front of the card. I'm cutting these little divots in on the envelope punch at the 1-inch mark, and that creates the neck of the jar where the jar top is going to go. And to further that illusion, you can round the corners of the top to create again the jar look. Now you can use an envelope punch or two for that, but mine has been used so much that it doesn't really cut very well anymore, so I was using my regular corner rounder there. And then I'll cut off this excess piece, and now you see that it really is starting to look like a jar. Now this bottom piece doesn't have to be perfect because it's going to be covered up by the lid of the jar that I created. So, just get it approximate as far as that part goes. So on this card I created the clouds using an embossing folder. And this actually worked pretty well. I haven't done this before, but I was pretty happy with how it turned out. And what I did in this case was that I placed the paper 2 inches into the cloud folder like you'll see here, and then I ran it through the embosser. Now, to create this, as with most embossing folders, you use the A plate and 2 B plates. And then what I did when I ran it through is I didn't run it all the way through. I only ran it as far as where the end of the embossing folder was. And the reason I did this is I didn't want to get a line embossed where the folder ended. And you'll see that that worked well. I got the clouds very well embossed, but not that line where the folder was. Now to make the clouds stand out, I used an embossing pen with embossing ink in here and covered each cloud with that ink. And since this is in pen form, I could be very precise and just get it exactly where I wanted. Then I placed a kind of a glittery white embossing powder on the top of it, and that gave each cloud kind of a neat cloud-like appearance. There's a little bit of glitter, but there's also some shading there. I just thought it worked good to turn the clouds white with something other than, say, just inking it. Next, I'll put the inside of the card in the base, and by the way, I'll have the base and all the other measurements in the video's description so that you know how to make this. But in addition to putting the inside of the card in, I also stamped one more phrase, which I had mentioned earlier, and this phrase says, "Roam free." And it's just a nice little touch at the bottom, but it still leaves you enough room to write a message. It just seemed empty down there, being it's narrower and by itself, and so I thought this filled it in and made it more of a finished look. Now I did use some distressed ink just on the edges of the interior, and I do this on the exterior of the card too, which you will see later on. And next thing I'm going to do is glue this panel inside the card, and you'll see that I pretty much always use liquid glue. I have this dispenser with the real narrow needle so that I can get a small amount at a time, and it's just Scotch quick dry glue, which works really well for me. Using a wet glue gives me some time to move things around and get it just where I want it. It seems I'm one of those people that can't get it straight the first time. So you learn cheats, and that's what works for me. Well, I'm at the point now where I can start putting the card together, and you'll see the various pieces here. I want to talk about the lid before we go too far. You'll see it come up here shortly. What I did was cut a piece of bronze metallic paper, and then I scored it going zigzagged to create that look of a screw top. And that actually worked pretty nicely for me. And again, I'll have all the measurements and everything in the video description at the end of this video. I found some blue and white gingham ribbon that worked really well for this card, and I just attached that with some glue dots to the lid. As we're watching putting together the card mat on top of the base, I wanted to talk about the base just a little bit more. This is a 4-bar size card, so it's a little smaller than an A2. The gray base was cut at 3.5 by 9 3/4, folded in half, and then I used a corner rounder at the top where the fold was, and that then created the base of the card. The blue mat is exactly the same cut, it's just starts off a little smaller size at 3.25 by 4 5/8. I cut the divot in exactly the same place at the 1-inch mark on the envelope maker. And by doing this with just a smaller piece of paper, you get a little bit, I guess it's about 1/8 of an inch of a border around the entire card, which sort of mimics the jar. At least that was my intention. Now I'm going to apply 2 layers of grass here, and I did shade that a little bit so that they would stand out a bit more. And then I placed the grass so that I could just trim off the excess on each side, and that way the grass goes all the way across. And this grass sets the scene for our little trailer to go on top of and fit right into. Now I have to trim the very bottom of the lid area, and you can't do this with a quarter rounder because it's too much of an angle. But it has to be trimmed just a little bit, because if you don't, that corner would hang out where the lid edge goes over, because the lid is rounded, but that bottom was straight. So hence again the reason has to be trimmed a bit. Now that lid that I made, I also cut a matching piece to go behind it in gray cardstock, which matched the base. And that way when it overhangs just a little bit, you won't really notice it so much when you open up the card, and that way it looks a bit more finished than if you just saw this raw paper on the other side. You can see that there. Now I'm just setting up the little labels at the bottom of the jar. I had previously stamped and cut out with the CottageCutz dies this little heart stamp, which is adorable, and I also heat embossed that with some clear embossing powder. The larger circle was also cut out with the CottageCutz die, popped up on a little foam tape, and is the focal point of that jar lid. Then it was just a simple matter of making a typical little bow, and I attached that again with some glue dot. Set it at a bit of an angle here to not cover up the tag, but to set it off. And you can see from this close-up just how cute the tag turned out with the stitch die and the ribbon and that beautiful grass above it. Now it's time just to tuck in the die cut into the grass. And by the way, the grass is also a CottageCutz die. I'll have the link to that and all the other instructions in the video description. Now to get our little trailer in there, I just tucked up the grass a little bit so I could slip this in. And the little bit of foam tape at the top of the trailer just makes it stand out and gives it some good dimension. Well, I sure enjoyed making this card for you, and I hope you enjoyed seeing these cute CottageCutz dies, as well as this little mason jar design itself. You could make a lot of really neat little cards using this design, so I hope you'll give it a try. Thanks for joining me today, and until next time, keep crafting.